very warm welcome. You're watching Gravitas with me, Molly Gambhir. Here's a look at what's lined up for you on the show tonight.
La France est pour le statu quo à Taïwan.
Our cover story tonight is about a remark made by the President of France, Emmanuel Macron. It is extraordinary in the impact that it's already had. And it stands out because of the timing, the venue, and the circumstances. On Gravitas tonight, we tell you why Macron's statement has split the West. After all, he has asked the EU to maintain strategic autonomy. And he has invited ire from multiple quarters. Should European nations chalk out their own path? We break it all down for you over the next few minutes. Also on the show for you tonight, China is now taking its action against the Uighurs in the country a step further. It wants to stop Uighurs from fasting during the holy month of Ramzan. We tell you how. Ghana has become the first country to approve what's being called a world-changer malaria vaccine. We get you a Gravitas special report. South Korea is paying reclusive youth, lonely youth to step out and socialize. We tell you more. And it's been called a breakthrough in the fight against Parkinson's disease, an early way to detect the disease. We tell you more. Our cover story tonight is about Emmanuel Macron, the President of France, a leader who has changed the DNA of French politics, a leader who refuses to adhere to one political definition, one ideology, or one camp. You know, it seems he now wants Europe to do the same, that he wants the EU countries to chalk out their own path and not just dance to the tunes of the Americans. Let's just have a look at what he said recently. In an interview over the weekend, right after his 3-day visit to China, Macron said that Europe must reduce its dependence on America, especially when it comes to their policy on China and Taiwan. You heard that right. And his remarks triggered all kinds of reactions. They annoyed his allies right from the Baltic to the Beltway. They told him that he has no right in speaking for all of Europe. And guess what? Macron could not care less. He says he stands by the remarks that were made, that being an American ally does not mean being a vassal. You have to listen to this.
France
is for the status quo in Taiwan. France supports the One China policy and the search for a peaceful settlement of the situation. This is moreover the position of the Europeans. It is a position which has always been compatible with the role of ally. But it is precisely here that I insist on the importance of strategic autonomy. Being allies does not mean being a vassal. It is not because we are allies that we do things together, that we decide to do, that we don't have the right to think for ourselves.
You heard that. Just because we are allies does not mean we don't think for ourselves. Fair enough. Every state has the right to take its own decisions, irrespective of its so-called allies and irrespective of what the allies may think about it. Too bad Western leaders, lawmakers and media houses do not agree with him. Just have a look at how they have reacted. I'm going to start with Marco Rubio. The Republican senator has threatened Macron with ending support for Ukraine. Not just that, he posted a video asking Macron if he is speaking for himself or for all of Europe. And if it is the latter, then perhaps the US also should focus on Taiwan and let European nations handle Ukraine. Those were the exact words spoken. Take a listen in.
And so I think this is a good moment for us to ask Europe, does Macron speak for all of Europe? Is Macron now the head of Europe? Is he now the most powerful leader in Europe? Because if he is, then there's some things we're going to need to change. Number one, Europe, including France specifically, has depended heavily on the United States for 70 years for their own defense. In fact, when Macron tried to play global superpower and send troops to North Africa to fight terrorists, he couldn't even get his own troops there. We had to fly them there, and we had to fly them back. He couldn't even get his own troops there. So if they're going to break off on their own and follow Macron's lead, that's going to save us a lot of money. As far as not getting involved in other conflicts that are not ours, we need to ask Europe, does he speak for them? Because we're pretty heavily involved in Ukraine right now. We're spending a lot of our taxpayer money on a European war.
And next we have Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister of the UK. She says Macron's trip to China was a sign of weakness and that his remarks gave a sense of moral equivalence between the US and the Chinese regime. And then we have American media houses. They are going all guns blazing on Macron. Take this Wall Street Journal report, for example. The headline reads, Macron blunders on Taiwan and Ukraine. That his remarks have weakened deterrence against China and undermined American support for Europe and Ukraine. And then we have the New York Times. In a piece published last week, it said Macron was playing the Gaullist card, a reference to former French president and his assertion of independence from the US after World War II. Just to put it simply, Macron's remarks have made the West uneasy, probably because Macron has said the quiet part out loud. You see, for a long time now, a few voices in Europe have been trying to resist the US-led radical decoupling from China. And why is that? You see, because not every country wants to ditch Beijing. Not every nation wants to stop doing business with the Chinese. They need Chinese exports. They need Chinese investments. Especially France and Germany. You see, their economies are hugely intertwined with China's, be it automobiles, batteries, mechanical equipment. They get a huge chunk of this from China. So when Macron talks about strategic autonomy, when he talks about an independent foreign policy, he seems to have a point. Why should Europe, after all, take cue from the US for just about everything? That is the argument that he is trying to make. An argument that may have upset America, but is being fully endorsed by the Chinese regime. Have a look at this op-ed now. The Global Times carried this on Tuesday. Read carefully what the headline states. Whose tail have Macron's words of truth stepped on? It goes on to state that Macron's statement will only help Europeans in understanding their own strategic interests and boundaries of Europe's relations with the US. That's not all. In another opinion piece, the Global Times saying that America's uneasiness over Macron's remarks shows Washington's declining ability to maintain hegemony. It says Europe's selfish policies on Europe are only distancing it from its friends. Now, here's the thing. This is not the first time that Macron has expressed his fears of vassalization. He has done this several times in the past, especially in the Trump era, when sanctions were dangled over European firms for doing business with China. So dismissing his fears as hurt, pride, ignored the reality. After all, Europe's economy is being left behind by the US-China rivalry. Their ongoing race to dominate technology and geopolitical platforms, this kind of thing is exactly what keeps Europe comfortable in the role of a geopolitical sidecar or free rider. It does not quite encourage the kind of burden sharing that Republicans like Marco Rubio want. You know, where America contributes more military assistance to Ukraine on one hand and asks Europe to stop engaging with China on the other. So my point is simple. This transatlantic relationship needs more balance. Treat the European Union like an irrelevance. Treating Macron's remarks like betrayal is not going to help. Perhaps some introspection might. And as for China, guess who it's hosting after Emmanuel Macron? The president of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. As I speak, in fact, he is in Shanghai trying to strengthen trade ties with China, following a rather rocky patch under the predecessor, Jair Bolsonaro. And his visit, by the way, comes right after a flurry of diplomatic tours from leaders around the world. But just why are so many of them heading to Beijing's doorstep? Our next report explores.
These visuals are from Shanghai. They show the arrival of Brazil's President Lula da Silva and his wife, the First Lady of Brazil, Rosângela Lula da Silva. They're on a 3-day visit aimed at repairing Brazil's ties with China, ties that were ruptured during the presidency of Jair Bolsonaro. Ahead of the visit, Lula said the agenda was to show Xi Jinping projects that will be of interest for Chinese investment. The two are also expected to discuss the Ukraine conflict, in which both leaders hope to act as mediators. But the bigger picture here is how more and more countries are not only diplomatically engaging with China, but looking at China as a negotiator in their issues. This graphic tells you the story. It shows you China's diplomatic engagements in the last 3 months. On the 6th of March, the Foreign Minister of Iran, Hossein Amir Abdullahian, the Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia, Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, and the President of the French Republic, Emmanuel Macron. 2 months before this, the Foreign Minister of China went on a 5-nation tour of Africa. The stopovers included Ethiopia, Angola, Gabon, Benin, and Egypt. He followed these visits up by dialing the leaders of Malaysia, Argentina, the Netherlands, Belgium, Turkey, and Japan. If we speak of specific instances, on the 31st of March, the Spanish Prime Minister was in Beijing. He is said to have signed 4 cooperation agreements with Xi Jinping. On the same day, Xi Jinping met Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. The two apparently discussed elevation of bilateral ties. And on the 29th of March, the Malaysian Prime Minister was in Beijing. The two are said to have discussed BRI projects. 10 days before these visits, the Chinese president himself went to Russia, looking to pitch his peace proposal to Putin. The Russian president is said to have welcomed his plan. What does this tell you? That Beijing has turned on the charm. It's on a diplomatic blitz of sorts, a bid to win back friends globally. Its leaders and diplomats are trotting the globe, trying to acquire new international partners. The aggressive wolf warrior rhetoric is gone. In its place, there's a warmer tone and a promise of cooperation. The agenda is clear. China wants an image makeover. It wants the world to see it as a gentle giant. And so far, its efforts seem to be working. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
And we are staying on with news from China. We have been telling you time and again on this very show how the Uyghur Muslims in China are being oppressed by the Chinese authorities. We've been getting you stories of their plight, what all they have been subjected to. But this time, it's not some type of spyware that's targeting the ethnic group. China is now taking things a step further. It is using actual spies to make sure that Uyghurs are not fasting during the holy month of Ramzan. How exactly are spies targeting this group? And to what extent will China go to oppress the Uighurs? A report by Radio Free Asia saying that the spies, whom China calls Uighurs, quote-unquote, are ordinary citizens and the police of an area near Turpan in the eastern Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. This might sound alarming, but some of the spies are members of the Uyghur community itself, according to the report. And this is nothing new for the Uyghur Muslims, by the way. Starting 2017, Xinjiang started banning Uyghurs from fasting during Ramzan. China has relentlessly tried to destroy their culture by detaining Uyghurs in so-called re-education camps in hopes to diminish their language and religion. And this year, China has stepped up its game by prohibiting everyone from fasting, regardless of their age, gender, or profession. The holy month of Ramzan, which runs from the 22nd of March to the 20th of April, might witness Uyghurs secretly fasting in their closets, as fasting is now considered a crime in China. So why is fasting so crucial during the holy month? You see, Muslims consider this time of the year as a month of fasting, prayer, reflection. Fasting during Ramzan is one of the key practices in which Muslims are urged to abstain from eating or drinking between sunrise and sunset. During the first week of the holy month, Chinese authorities interrogated 56 Uyghur residents and former detainees. The police arrested 54 of them for violating the anti-fasting law. And what was the punishment? Well, the police has not spoken a word about what they do to the so-called criminals. And why would the Chinese recruit spies from the Uyghurs, from their own community? Well, China says the language barrier is the reason. Authorities cannot seem to understand the Uyghur spoken word, and thus Uyghurs are made to spy on their own community members. But why would one spy on their own people? Well, it's China, and orders are orders. The police saying that some police stations have over 200 officers. Most of them are Uyghurs. So there are spies in the police force who observe the Uyghur officers, whether they are fasting during Ramzan. That's not all. The Uyghur officers who are under continuous surveillance are made to keep an eye on the Uyghur residents. I say this as the elderly and children are under special attention and surveillance. The police believing that the older people have rigid ideas and don't want to change, and children are easy to confuse and thus are susceptible to the words of the adults. But let's just talk more about the ones who are being oppressed, the Uyghurs. They face a continuous threat of complete erasure. As China continuously targets the community, China has gone to the extent of using a spyware campaign to target the Uyghurs through Android apps, including messaging services and prayer time applications as well. Some firms created app features which would detect and alert a person when a Uyghur is close by. The UN has taken note and called out China regarding its absurd behavior towards the cultural group. It has said that China is responsible for serious human rights violations against the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. But how many more painful acts of oppression will the Uyghurs have to face? And let's talk cricket now. We are in the middle of the Indian Premier League, but there are developments across the border in Pakistan. You see, there has been an India versus Pakistan battle bubbling under the surface. This relates to the Asia Cup that is to be held in Pakistan this year. India have made it clear that they will not go across the border. But now, former Pakistan captain and an influential voice, Javed Miandad, has muddied the waters with a rather bizarre comment. Let's just jog your memory first. Javed Miandad is one of Pakistan's greatest players. He is remembered for being a gritty player who would never back down from a fight. This is a player who famously hit Chetan Sharma for a 6 off the last ball of a final in Sharjah. It was the 18th of April 1986, the Australia Asia Cup, and Miandad's heroics coincided with Pakistan dominating this contest over the next decade, especially in Sharjah in the UAE. Miandad was part of the Pakistan team that won the 1992 World Cup in Australia, and incidentally, he bowed out of the game following a defeat against who else but India in the 1996 World Cup quarter-final in Bengaluru. Now, let's just tell you why Miandad has made it to this edition of Gravitas tonight. The 65-year-old appeared on a podcast in Pakistan recently. He was asked to comment on India's refusal to tour Pakistan over security concerns. Miandad's comments, translated, are on these lines. I'm quoting, "If you are destined to die, then you will die. Life and death are in the hands of the Almighty." You heard that right. Really, Mr. Miandad? Is that how you view the lives of sports persons? Just remind you why the Indian Cricket Board does not want to tour Pakistan. In 2009, the Sri Lankan team was in the country to play a test series. Terrorists opened fire on the Lankan team bus just outside Lahore's Gaddafi Stadium. 6 Sri Lankan players were injured. That bus had the likes of Mahila Jayawardene and Kumar Sangakara travelling in it. 6 police personnel accompanying the team were killed along with 2 civilians. The driver of a minivan carrying the match officials also died. The tour was abandoned immediately and the Lankans were airlifted to the airport, from where they immediately flew home. That incident was the death knell for international cricket in Pakistan. Pakistan turned into a pariah and the Pakistan Cricket Board had to host international games in the UAE. Of late, teams have been touring Pakistan again and they have been provided presidential level security. But that's not enough. How do you tell players to leave that nagging doubt behind? After all, no one wants to lose their life while playing cricket or any sport whatsoever. Why should they? You see, Mr. Miandad, no one wants to die. They want to play for their countries and come back home safe. You remember what happened to the New Zealand team a year and a half ago? They were in Rawalpindi to play 3 one-dayers, but then intelligence reports surfaced that a terror attack was imminent. The Kiwis did not head to the ground. They took the first flight out with the full support of Jacinda Ardern's government. England followed suit immediately. They took the security reports at face value and cancelled a short trip ahead of the T20 World Cup in the UAE. So different rules, it seems, for England and New Zealand, and different rules for the Indian cricket team, is it, Mr. Miandad? And by the way, we don't need to remind you about the relations between India and Pakistan. And how can I not take you back to the year 2008? When terrorists from Pakistan made their way to Mumbai in India, the world watched aghast as these men held India's financial capital to ransom. They killed innocent Indians and even foreign nationals. Surely, Mr. Miandad, they did not die because it was willed by the Almighty. They died because of terrorists from Pakistan. And here you are trying to trivialize the matter. Well, perhaps you should advise your government in Pakistan to act against terrorists on its soil, and also perhaps share the details of the whereabouts of your close relative. The government of India has made it absolutely clear that the Indian team will not travel to Pakistan. Who guarantees the security of the likes of Virat Kohli, Rohit Sharma and others? And can your government give a signed undertaking that there will be no untoward incident? The Indian Cricket Board has a simple suggestion. The team does not fear the Pakistan cricket team. Remember the recent T20 World Cup in Australia? India won that game at the Melbourne Cricket Ground, played the Asia Cup on neutral ground and let the best team win. As far as the threats of boycotting the ODI World Cup in India later this year, let's just call out the Pakistan Cricket Board. Its former president, Ramiz Raja, said last year, remember, that his body had to learn from India and the financial clout that the BCCI wields. The PCB is dependent on funding from the International Cricket Council to stay solvent. And that money will not come if Pakistan boycotts the World Cup. Boycott by all measures, but are you ready to face the financial penalty? Tell your government to stop funding and sheltering terrorists. And then let's talk. On to North Korea now and its latest provocation. It has once again raised the stakes. You see, this time it's not just threatening South Korea but also Japan. In the latest, North Korea unveiled a new powerful weapon. Seoul says the missile sent Japan into panic. Could this be a new type of ballistic missile that may have used advanced solid fuel? The missile launch triggered a scare in northern Japan, where residents ran to take cover, though there turned out to be no danger. But the bigger question is, what really is the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un up to? Our next report telling you more.
There is tension in the air in Japan. The northern region of Hokkaido was jolted by an alert warning, forcing people to take cover. Rail passengers in Sapporo were held up. Screens told the waiting passengers that train traffic would resume once it was confirmed that the missile had not damaged the rail network. The danger was real.
After the J alert sounded, there was an announcement saying to take cover underground because of the danger that something might fall.
I really did not know what the alert was about, so I was thinking that maybe there had been a train accident or there was an earthquake or something. I didn't feel like anyone was particularly panicking.
The cause of panic was North Korea after it fired a missile. Japan later said the missile had not fallen within its territory and posed no threat to people on its territory. While North Korea keeps firing missiles and rockets and artillery shells, alarming its neighbor South Korea of late, Pyongyang's actions have begun to rattle Tokyo too. Seoul says the missile fired on Thursday is likely a new type of ballistic missile. What makes it different and dangerous is the use of solid fuel in the missile. If that's true, then it marks a huge technological leap for the hermit nation. Pyongyang's known intercontinental ballistic missiles are liquid-fueled, but solid-fuel ICBMs can be game-changers. These missiles can be launched from land or submarines. This has topped leader Kim Jong-un's wish list for long. The launch comes days after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un called for strengthening the country's war deterrence. The leader keeps posing with nuclear bombs and rockets, making no attempt to hide his intentions. Just a week back, North Korea stunned the world by claiming to have successfully tested an underwater nuclear-capable drone. Pyongyang claims the weapon system cruised for over 1,000 kilometers. North Korea has already fired several of its most powerful ICBMs this year. With tensions rising, Washington and Seoul have been working closely. Both nations have staged joint military exercises with advanced stealth jets and high-profile US strategic assets. However, China blames the quote-unquote negative impact of the US military drills for the Korean peninsula tensions. Pyongyang cut hotline contact with Seoul last week, which South Korea called irresponsible. And earlier this year, the North Korean leader ordered the country's military to intensify drills to prepare for a real war. With the latest launch triggering a further escalation in tensions on the Korean peninsula, where are things headed? Are the worst fears about to come true?
On to Ghana now, which has become the first country to approve a new malaria vaccine developed by Oxford University. This is the first time that the shot has received regulatory approval anywhere in the world. The new vaccine has been approved for children of ages 5 to 36 months. This is because children pose the highest risk of death from malaria. And scientists hope that this first step will enable Ghanaian and African children to effectively combat the deadly disease. Why are new vaccines being developed for malaria? Well, that's because the malaria parasite has a rather complicated structure and life cycle, which has been delaying efforts to create effective vaccines. This new vaccine, called the R21, has gone through 30 years of research with the design and provision of a high-efficacy vaccine. Experts say the new vaccine is hugely effective as compared to the previous shots for malaria. How exactly is this vaccine different from the other vaccines? Well, this particular shot has a manufacturing advantage in which it can produce 200 million doses annually. It has an 80% effectiveness rate as compared to the 60% rate of other vaccine shots. The vaccine is much more affordable, as scientists say that it can be produced in a few dollars. But could the production of vaccines have been fast-tracked? Perhaps had malaria overwhelmed the hospitals of New York, Italy, Spain or China, perhaps the story would have been different. We sincerely hope that does not happen. But what we are trying to say is that for Africa, malaria is worse than COVID-19. Africa, the demand for a malaria vaccine there is mostly concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa, in which Ghana witnesses the death of a child every 1 minute due to malaria. And WHO estimates say that there could be a requirement of 110 million doses per year by 2036. Ghana has a population of over 31 million and records nearly 6 million cases of malaria. Every year, over 12,000 lives are lost to this deadly disease. Just that it's worse than COVID, because all of this is happening in Africa. That might be the reason it never makes it to the headlines around the world. But let's just take a closer look at how mosquitoes spread this deadly disease. First, a mosquito feeds on a person who is carrying the disease. Now takes place the transmission of the parasite, where the mosquito bites an uninfected person. The parasites enter the body and attack the liver. As the parasite matures, it starts infecting the red blood cells. And this is when people commonly develop symptoms. Vaccines are a lifesaver, and we have come a long way. We have defeated smallpox, polio. But there is still no long-term vaccine for tuberculosis. For West Nile, Zika, HIV, the malaria vaccine is a great start, but we still have a long way to go. Let me now ask you a question. What if you were paid just to get out of your home and socialize? We are talking about big bucks, like hundreds of dollars. Well, South Korea is paying its people to simply not sit at home, especially the teenagers and young adults. The country has come up with a unique initiative, but what's behind the move? Why is the country doing this? Our next report getting you the complete story.
Hikikomori is a term used to describe severe social withdrawal. While hikikomori is mostly a Japanese phenomenon, cases have been found in other parts of the world as well, including South Korea, and the country has now come up with a rather unique way to bring about change. How? By offering money, and not some small amount. The South Korean government has launched an initiative to provide funds to its youth. The funds will have various categories, along with nearly $500 for general living costs. These funds will provide the reclusive youth of ages between 9 and 24 with education, job counseling, and health support. This might seem as a first world country problem, as South Korea flushes out hundreds of dollars to what the country says is to help its youth reintegrate into society. This is happening while other countries face skyrocketing inflation, food shortages, political instability, and staggering economic crisis. But South Korea clearly has its priorities straight. The nation wishes to rectify its shrinking working-age population amid alarmingly low birth rates. South Korea is set to become one of the world's most aged countries by 2024. This proves their concern for encouraging their youth to go out and work. But the country has failed before when it came to boosting its youth. South Korea has spent more than $200 billion to increase its population, but could not succeed. So, will this new plan to offer money to its youth prove counterproductive for the nation? While South Korea's economy has skyrocketed in recent decades, it remains plagued by high youth unemployment. This is after the country spent tons of dollars to improve its youth employment rate. Experts say that although it's good to try different approaches, the new plan cannot be seen as a long-term solution to fix the problem. Could the new initiative to offer enormous funds to the nation's youth be seen as a public welfare taken too far, or the strange disease of a first world country using its luxury of entitlement? The answers lie in how the new initiative performs and if it really helps the degrading youth population of South Korea.
Our next story is about a breakthrough, one that comes with far-reaching implications for people around the world. It is a breakthrough that could play a huge role in the fight against Parkinson's disease. I'm talking about a new technique that's been developed by scientists, which could help diagnose Parkinson's disease before the symptoms show. I will tell you why this is crucial and what the researchers are saying. They are calling it a groundbreaking new test, a game changer. How exactly? Because it can accurately diagnose the disease. And not just that, it also paves the way for new treatments and even cures. How exactly does this test work? It can identify the disease using samples of the fluid surrounding the brain and the spinal cord. This is according to a study that was published in Lancet Neurology. And I want to make this as jargon-free as possible and break it down for you in the simplest terms. Basically, this technique studies and analyzes the buildup of abnormal proteins that are linked to Parkinson's disease. Now, what we know is that this buildup of proteins occurs in the early stages of the disease. This basically happens before the loss of certain nerve cells, which, by the way, is the only other biological change signaling Parkinson's. Essentially, the test lays the foundation for a biological diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. Its ability to detect the conditions before any other changes can be detected. And that's worth appreciating. And which is why it is being called a game changer. It has in fact been said that this launches a new biological era in Parkinson's research, one that will change clinical care and pave the way forward for treatments and even cures. Let's now tell you what else made news around the world. Time for Gravitas Global Headlines.
Ukraine's economy shrank a whopping 29.1% in 2022, as per the state's statistics service. The World Bank says Ukraine needs $411 billion for reconstruction and recovery. Iran hanged 75% more people in 2022 than the previous year, as per two leading European human rights groups. The figure of 582 executions in Iran last year is the highest since 2015. U.S. Federal Appeals Court rules to keep an abortion pill, mifepristone, temporarily available, but under tighter regulation. A lawsuit over approval of the pill continues. On the 12th day of nationwide protests since strikes began in mid-January, demonstrators in France blocked an access road to the country's constitutional council with rubbish bins. Railway workers gathered at Gare de Lyon, Paris train station, and then marched into the station's hallway and took the subway while chanting anti-pension reform slogans. Assailants shot and killed 9 people in northern Ecuador in an attack authorities blamed on organized crime gangs. According to officials, dozens of attackers arrived in boats and cars at a small port in Esmeraldas province and then opened fire. 2 police officers were killed and 15 others injured after a bridge collapsed in central Colombia. Video released by the mayor of the nearby municipality shows wreckage of several vehicles that fell when the bridge collapsed. The authorities have ruled out a terrorist attack as the origin of the collapse and respective investigations are underway. Cyclone Ilsa reached a Category 4 intensity over the Indian Ocean and is expected to be the first storm on that scale to cross the coast of Western Australia in a decade. Thousands living in the cyclone's path have evacuated in recent days. Even as a sandstorm obscured the skyline and covered the city in a layer of dust, residents of Beijing continued with their daily activities. Beijing faces regular sandstorms in March and April due to its proximity to the massive Gobi Desert, as well as deforestation and soil erosion throughout northern China. The WTA will return to China this year after ending its 16-month boycott, despite the uncertain status of Chinese tennis player Peng Shuai. The WTA suspended events in the country in December 2021 following a high-profile row with Beijing over the player's well-being, after she made sexual assault allegations against the former Chinese vice premier. Holders Real Madrid breezed past 10-man Chelsea in the first leg of their Champions League quarter-final tie. Karim Benzema and Marco Asensio got on the scoresheet as Los Blancos beat Chelsea 2-0 at the Santiago Bernabeu. The deciding leg of the tie will take place in London next week.
On that note, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas Tonight. Thanks very much for watching. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Good night.
Got down.